Welcome to the channel, English Epics. Maybe if I write a full confession, I'll finally find some peace and be able to rest a little. My name is Elise. This weekend, Dawn and I would have celebrated our 53rd wedding anniversary. But instead, I am alone and suffering, haunted by a flood of terrible memories that keep coming back to torment me. There is no justification for what I did. Fortunately, the guilt and shame I felt pushed me to straighten myself out and step back from the edge nearly 50 years ago. Why didn't I confess everything back then? Dawn was from a city in another state. We met when he came here for a business meeting with the company. We had dinner together a few times, and for both of us, it was almost love at first sight. 6 months later, Dawn arranged everything and got transferred to the local office. About 3 months after he arrived, we got engaged, and 4 months later, we were married. The problem began on our wedding day. We had a beautiful wedding and reception. Or at least, I thought it was beautiful until the very end of the reception. Cliff was Dawn's best man, and that's when the trouble began. Cliff and I had been schoolmates since he moved to our town in the 5th grade. That I in high school, we started dating and became known as a couple at school. On the night of our graduation party, we slipped away from the event we were attending, and I lost my virginity that we both attended the same university, enrolled in the same engineering program, and spent a lot of time together. I dated very few other boys, while he dated several girls. Cliff was an incredible lover, and I was always happy to crawl into bed with him that we were great lovers. But during the second half of his senior year, we both began to realize that marriage wasn't right for us. There were no real problems between us, but we just seemed to be drifting toward different adult visions of what we wanted out of life. After graduation, he enlisted in the military. During the last year and a half of college, I ended up dating more guys than I had in the previous 6 years combined. During his first leave when he came home, we both confirmed that we weren't right for each other. We agreed to stay friends and had sex on the last night of his leave. And yes, we did remain friends, and even occasionally had sex afterward. Cliff completed his 2 years of military service, returned home, and got a job at the same large engineering firm I had joined a year earlier. I was shocked when he walked in on his first day of work. Our friendship continued, and we would occasionally go out together. However, 6 months after Cliff returned, he was already married to a pretty girl from a small town on the East Coast where he had been stationed. At the time, I didn't realize that the last 3 times I had slept with him, he was already engaged. Of course, that was the end of my relationship with Cliff. I wasn't hurt at all, and I was genuinely happy for both of them. Now, dear listeners, don't jump ahead. But yes, Dawn was transferred here. He came for that business meeting just a few months after Cliff got married. As it turned out, Dawn and Cliff had previously worked together on a project, and they quickly became good friends again. When things started to get serious between Dawn and me, Cliff never said a word about our past relationship, so it made sense why Dawn asked Cliff to be his best man. Now, back to the wedding. It was a large event, since I was a relatively prominent and long-standing member of the community. The ceremony was beautiful, and the reception was elegant, and I was as happy as I could possibly be, until a group of our colleagues pulled us apart and started pouring drinks to get us drunk. They succeeded with Dawn, and they tried the same with me, but I wasn't having it. It was my wedding night, and I had more important things to do than get drunk. By midnight, my parents and most of the older guests, those over 40, had left. The younger crowd was deep into a champagne binge. One thing was clear: Mom and Dad had been wise to reserve hotel rooms for the entire younger generation. Very few of them could even find their cars, let alone drive them. Eventually, I decided I'd had enough and tried to find Dawn. I found him, sitting on a chair, completely out of it. I wanted to cry. I had no idea what to do. Just as my despair peaked, I felt someone take my elbow. I turned and saw Cliff. He clearly hadn't joined in the drinking. His wife, Jerry, hadn't been able to attend. She was pregnant, with about a month to go. She hadn't been feeling well, and was staying with her mother until the birth. Once the baby was born, Cliff planned to take some leave and fly out east to be with her. He asked me if I wanted help getting Dawn to our room, and I quickly said yes. Together, we carried Dawn to the room and got him into bed. By the time we were done, I genuinely felt sorry for myself. Our wedding night, and a husband who was dead drunk. Feel like heading down to the bar for a cup of coffee. Yeah, I'd love to, but I'm still in my wedding dress. It's already late there, won't be many people around, and no one will care. Come on, let's go. I'd enjoy a cup. What the hell? Dress or no dress, going out for a cup of coffee was better than sitting in a room with my passed-out husband feeling sorry for myself. I grabbed my purse, and we headed for the elevator and the bar. We drank coffee and chatted. Cliff told me about the situation with Jerry. It was a bit awkward, but it didn't really matter. He repeated several times that it was hard for her to travel for more than 2 weeks, and that he missed her. The bright spot was that he would be flying out to see her the following weekend. After that, she only had about 3 weeks left until the baby was due. We finished our coffee and went back upstairs. That he walked me to my room and said how much he enjoyed spending time with me again. As he said that, he pulled me toward him, and we kissed. Well, the kiss turned out to be more than just a friendly, goodnight kiss. I realized I was snuggled up against him, and his hand was pressing me hard against him. I reluctantly pushed him away and got ready to enter the room. I was afraid to go back into the suite, and just before inserting the key card, I turned to him and told him he was a good man. Without really thinking, I asked if the best man was supposed to take care of the bride and groom until they departed. At that question, a faint smile appeared on Cliff's face. Although I wasn't drunk, I still felt a light, happy glow. I know that if it had been anyone else besides Cliff, and if we didn't have a history, what I said next would never have been said. I told him the bride needed help and said, I don't think it's right for a bride not to feel her husband inside her on their wedding night. And if the groom isn't up to the task, isn't it the best man's duty to step in? I don't need to tell you how he answered. I inserted the key card, quietly opened the door, and it was obvious Dawn was out cold. I gently closed the door, and we headed to Cliff's room. I didn't need anyone to tell me that this wasn't what I should be doing, especially on my wedding night. But I was so angry at Dawn that I quickly reasoned he deserved it, and that every bride had the right to sex on her wedding night. It only took a few moments before I slipped out of the dress. That's when I remembered I had prepared a surprise for Dawn. I wasn't wearing any underwear. Cliff noticed right away and asked if I had felt improper standing at the altar in front of all those people without anything on underneath. I told him I had felt naughty, and that during the ceremony, thinking about it made me almost feel ashamed. He smiled and told me my surprise hadn't gone to waste. He sincerely appreciated it, then pushed me onto the bed. It was a warm, good, and familiar feeling being with Cliff, and he hadn't lost a bit of his skill when it came to fully satisfying me. The only downside was that he used protection. He didn't want me to have to explain why his footprints were where they shouldn't have been. In that moment, I regretted that we hadn't been more compatible. He had so many wonderful qualities, but a marriage between us would never have worked. We were a great party couple, and we were fantastic in bed. But that was the extent of it. The fact that he came back to me again felt so good. We did it a second time. Only this time, I convinced him not to use protection. Instead, when the time came, I laid a towel across my chest and let him release onto it. By then, all the effects of alcohol had worn off, and I lay comfortably in his arms. For the last couple of hours, I had completely forgotten about Dawn. My body belonged to Cliff, and then everything came crashing down on me like a scream. I looked at the clock. It was approaching 5 a.m. I jumped out of bed, threw on a robe as best I could, and rushed back to my room. I sighed with relief when I opened the door and saw Dawn exactly where we had left him. I undressed, washed up, took care of my toiletries, and climbed into bed next to Dawn. I could sleep in, since our flight to Acapulco wasn't until later in the afternoon. I lay there for a while, looking at him, confirming to myself that I truly did love him. The pangs of guilt over what had happened made me feel miserable, and I fell asleep in tears. I woke up to the feeling of a hand gently stroking my body and sunlight slipping through a small gap in the curtains. It took only a moment for me to realize that Don was sitting behind me, caressing me. I stretched and began to turn toward him. "Good morning, Mrs. Rapp, my beautiful wife," he said. "I'm so sorry I passed out last night. I'll make it up to you, whenever and however you want. I'm sorry. I should have been stronger." I was surprised that instead of showing obvious signs of a hangover, Don seemed well-rested, energetic, and ready to go. Much later, I found out he had a low tolerance for alcohol. He usually passed out long before he actually got drunk, so he rarely suffered from hangovers. I gasped, remembering what had happened. But I quickly pulled myself together and told him I loved him, that we would make everything right during our honeymoon. Then I swiftly changed the subject to packing, grabbing something to eat, and getting to the airport. I fought back the crushing realization that just a few hours after my wedding, I had already been unfaithful. Holding back the tears was all I could manage. Just when I thought I had everything under control, memories of Cliff came rushing back. The tears started to fall, and Don was immediately by my side, wanting to know what was wrong. I lied and told him I was simply overwhelmed with happiness. We had a wonderful honeymoon and spent many hours together in bed. When we returned, Cliff told us that Jerry was doing well, but that the baby would have to be delivered via C-section. It was scheduled for the week after Thursday, and he was planning to fly out east on Tuesday evening. On Friday night, Cliff called and asked if I could come over on Saturday to help him decorate the house for Jerry and the baby. That morning, Don had a tennis match, so I agreed to help. I don't know why I did it, but instead of putting on old work clothes, I wore a pair of tight short shorts and a tank top. At this point, I should tell you, Cliff and I weren't in love, and we had never been in love. We were lovers. Well, that was just the beginning. After we finished decorating, we ended up in the bedroom, and I enjoyed him again. After that, we would occasionally find excuses to get together for sex. Naturally, we were very careful not to get caught or do anything that might raise suspicion. It went on for about 18 months, until it ended a few months before I gave birth to our first child. The day after I gave birth, I was shocked to learn that Cliff was in the hospital. He had a broken arm and a pretty bad bruise from falling down a staircase at work. I tried to visit him, but he was heavily sedated, and I couldn't say much to him. A couple of days later, I went to see him again. When I arrived, Jerry was just leaving. She told me he would be discharged that afternoon, but she knew he'd be happy to see me. When I reached the door, he motioned for me to come in and closed it behind me. He started talking and pointed out that we were now both parents. In general, his comments boiled down to the fact that he'd done a lot of thinking while in the hospital. We had been cheating on our spouses for some time, and although we had been more than discreet, he was afraid that one day our luck would run out. We didn't want to destroy our marriages, and he felt that now was the right time to end it. His words felt like a slap in the face. We didn't meet that often, but being with him still felt wonderful. I had looked forward to our occasional encounters, but as I listened and thought about it, I had to admit, he was right. I gently kissed him on the cheek and left. I was about halfway home when it hit me. I had to pull off the road and stop in a shopping center parking lot. I nearly drowned in uncontrollable tears. What I had done was unforgivable. And why did I wait for Cliff to be the one to recognize our mistake and end it? How could I have been so careless and unloving toward my perfect husband? I had to ask myself, what the hell was wrong with me that I had let things go this far? There were no ready answers to my thoughts. But once I pulled myself together, I made a promise. Don would always come first in my thoughts and actions, and something like this would never happen again. That was the end of our affair, and I never strayed again. I'm certain Cliff didn't either. I'll admit, at a few parties, we were known to share a lingering glance or a playful touch. But who doesn't? Of course, I never had the courage to confess, to don what I had done, or ask for his forgiveness. I just chose to do what was right, and I've done so ever since. Don passed away yesterday at the age of 81. His final words were the most devastating I have ever heard. In a weak voice, he asked, "Why didn't you tell me about your affair with Cliff?" A moment later, he was gone. I was shattered. I left the hospital in tears. I'm sure most people assumed it was natural, that I was grieving the loss of my husband, and I was. But the bitter tears came from the realization that somehow he had known. He had lived with that knowledge all these years, and I had never been fully honest with him. Today, our lawyer delivered a letter to me. It will haunt me for the rest of my life. The letter is dated 15 days after the birth of our son. Dear Elise, the fact that you're reading this letter means the divorce papers were never delivered. The first thing I want to say is thank you. Thank you for ending the affair with Cliff, or at least for hiding it so well that I never knew it continued. Your affair started falling apart just before you became pregnant with our first child, David. I was at a restaurant, not one of my usual spots, with a few clients that I overheard a locker room story coming from the booth next to ours. This guy was bragging about having sex with a bride on her wedding night while her husband was passed out. In fact, he said he did it twice at a T1 point. I heard him say that he knew both the bride and groom very well, and that he had been the best man. The story amused me a bit, and I couldn't help but wonder how much truth there was to it then. I turned my attention back to my clients. But as I was leaving, I was shocked to see Cliff sitting with those men in the neighboring booth, and then realized I had recognized his voice that he didn't see me. You usually don't look at our bank statements, but if you had, you would have seen several cash withdrawals totaling a few $1,000s. The money went to a private investigator that he caught you and Cliff together about 2 weeks later, and again about 6 or 7 weeks after that. At the time, I assumed that as your pregnancy progressed, you two had stopped seeing each other. The attorney will destroy the photos before handing this letter over to you. When you gave birth to our son, I was the happiest man on earth, until a terrible thought struck me. Is he really mine? The first time the investigator reported seeing you together roughly coincided with the time you became pregnant. I had no way of knowing whether Cliff used protection, and I knew you weren't on the pill before coming to the hospital to visit you that night. I have to admit, I helped Cliff fall down the office stairs. Before the paramedics arrived, I told him that if I ever saw him so much as look at you the wrong way again, he would be the cause of at least one divorce. He'd be looking for a new job, and he'd likely be making several more trips to the hospital. I hope my instincts were right, and I assume that since you're reading this letter, it means you and Cliff eventually ended things that I had a DNA test done. The results came back today, and thank God our son is, in fact, ours. That if that hadn't been the case, I wouldn't be writing this letter right now, and we'd be in the early stages of a divorce that I'm sitting in my new office, since my former office has been turned into a nursery. You've been home for almost a week now, and I can hear the wonderful bubbling and cooing sounds of David in the next room as you get him ready for bed, that I'm torn between an overwhelming sense of joy and happiness over the newest member of our family, and a deep, aching fear, because of the little I now know about you and Cliff. As I write this letter, I have no idea what to expect from the future. Will you end your affair, or now that the pregnancy is over, will you return to Cliff? Of course, I can't know how much time will pass before you read this letter, if you ever read it. I pray that many years will have passed, which would mean you ended the affair. The unknown is a terrible ghost to live with, and how long I'll have to live with it is one of the greatest uncertainties of all. It's incredibly hard to face the truth and move through life not knowing whether you can trust your partner. Now, every night I go to bed praying for this nightmare to fade, and I almost fear waking up the next day, afraid of hearing news that might lead to divorce. The most wonderful thing that could happen right now is that you'd come to me and we could be honest with each other and find a way to heal the wound. If you truly feel remorse, I will forgive you, because I love you. However, I don't really expect that to happen, and clearly it didn't, because if it had, I would have destroyed this letter. I'm sorry you're reading this after I'm gone. I would have loved it if you had told me why. You are the love of my life, your unknown husband, and I hope he lived a number of happy years. Dawn. The funeral is tomorrow, since I read that letter. I don't think I've stopped crying that a small bright moment came last night when Cliff and Jerry called to let me know. They were in town. It would be so nice to see them again. They moved to Hawaii to retire 15 years ago, and this will be one of the few times I've seen them since they left. They came to the house after the funeral. At one point, I went into the kitchen to make fresh drinks. Cliff excused himself to Jerry and followed me, offering to help. He was very nervous and uneasy, and just as I was about to carry out the drinks, he came over to me, helped me set down the tray, and then said in a frightened voice, "Jerry asked me to find out if you received a letter from Dawn recently, one that was written many years ago." It's a good thing I had already set the tray down because I surely would have dropped it. Oh God, how does she know? I saw the anxiety and fear wash over Cliff's face. What? What was in the letter, Elise? I hadn't noticed Jerry approach the doorway. It's all right, Alice. All the water overflowed under the bridge a long time ago. If you show Cliff the letter from Dawn, I can get rid of that letter I wrote for him. Thank you for being with us. And if you're one of those who watches silently, just leave a like. It helps new stories come to light.